All right, so the bias scenarios. And every time I start this, I go, gosh, I enjoy talking about this. However, I'm always concerned I'm going to get in trouble. So here we go. Scenario one, interested in determining the percent of population who believe in God. A surveyor stood outside a church on Sunday morning and asked all of the congregants a neutrally worded question about whether or not they believe in God. Will this survey produce biased results? Yes or no? And it's like, well, yes, it will produce biased results. And why? Well, it's reasonable to assume that most of the people who attend church believe in God. Consequently, the percentage of people who believe in God is probably overrepresented, and the people who do not believe in God are underrepresented. We've set up, this is known as selection bias, which is really just saying, hey, we made a bad way of making a selection. All right, we selected a really poor sample. And the bias, and so selection bias is kind of a broad term, and sometimes it'll be the only choice that's offered, but it's broken down into multiple types of bias. And so let's talk about them. First off, we have undercoverage bias. Well, who didn't we cover? Those who do not believe in God are not likely to be at church. So we're going to undercover those who don't believe in God. Response bias. If I'm outside of a church, I may feel pressured to say that I believe in God because of all of those around me. I don't want to look different. I want to fit in, the peer pressure aspect. Peer pressure is a type of response bias. It's responding in, because what happens if a friend you stayed with a friend and they took you to church? Well, you may feel pressured to say that you believe in God because of those around you, right? So that's a couple types of bias. This is actual AP question. It's 2008 question 2. You can look that up, and I can show you how to do that in the classroom. And a local school board plans to conduct a survey of parents' opinions about year-round schooling in elementary schools. The school board contacts 500 of the families by mail. The survey question is provided below. A proposal has been submitted that would require students in elementary schools to attend school on a year-round basis. Do you support this proposal, yes or no? So let's just look at the question and see if the question is subject to bias. When I read that question, in my personal opinion, I'm like, you know what? That's a pretty non-biased question. So it does not, and it's not a sensitive question, so probably not going to be subject to response bias. So, and they're contacting 500 families by mail, so that's a pretty good sample size. So this is starting to sound like it's not a problem. The school board, but of the 500, so they sent out 500, and the school board receives responses from 98 of the families. Whoa. That type of bias, we only received 98, so that's starting to sound like non-response bias. And 76 of the responses indicated support for year-round schools. Based on the outcome, the school board concludes that most of the families with at least one child in elementary school prefer year-round schooling. What type of bias? Non-response bias, only 98 of the 500 families, or 19.6%, responded to the survey. It is likely that the opinions of parents who are most in favor of year-round schools were the ones who responded, and they are overrepresented in the study. B, could we just contact another 500 families and add their data to the original results? That sounds reasonable, except you cannot fix bias. Once you have biased data, it's bad. You have to throw it out and start over. So that is not reasonable. Increasing sample size actually fixes most problems in statistics, makes a lot of things better, but if you have biased data, it doesn't. Consider this. If you have cancer in your body and they inject some healthy blood cells into your body, you still have cancer. You have to remove the cancer. all right? So you have to get rid of the bias data. So once bias is entered, you have to throw it away and start over. So let's name 2 ways to address the bias in a survey. First, the school board go, well, we randomly selected 500. We can go back and contact those 402 by phone or knocking on the doors and try to get their responses. And if we got their responses, because that was from the original sample, that would fix the problem. We no longer have non-response bias because we contacted them. Or secondly, the school board could take a completely new survey using phone calls or person-to-person contact. So this is the one that we probably do. We probably throw away the data and start over, but they could go back and talk to the 402 that they originally missed. Okay, so that's one scenario. Here's another scenario, the second bias scenario, 2004, part B, Form B, question 2. At a certain university, students who live in the dormitories eat at a common dining hall. Recently, some students have been complaining about the quality of food served there. The dining hall manager decides to do a survey to estimate the proportion of students living in the dormitories who think that the quality of food should be improved. One evening, the manager asked the first 100 students entering the dining hall to answer the following question. Many students believe that the food served in the dining hall needs improvement. Do you think that the quality of food served here needs improvement, even though that would increase the cost of the meal plan? Yes, no, or no opinion. I'm going to go ahead and tell you the fact that they say yes, no, or no opinion, that's not a problem. You can do that. You can have multiple choices for your answer. That's not a problem. So, part A. In this setting, explain how bias may have been introduced based on the way this sample was selected. This is not about the wording of the question. They said how it was selected. Well, who was selected? They selected the first 100 students. So we have a couple things here. The first 100 students eating at the dining hall may have very different opinions than those that come later. Also, it's likely the food is fresher for when the first 100 students arrive, and it's likely that the first 100 students have a more positive attitude. In other words, they're freshmen and they're running to the cafeteria and they're all excited about the food. The first 100 are probably hungrier, and the food always tastes better when you're really hungry. So you just need to come up with a reason as to why it may overrepresent. The first 100 are actually excited about the food and rush to get to the cafeteria because they really enjoy it. And then I need to make the comment, and I didn't have it here, and with any of these, and are not representative of all students, and are not representative of all the students, and are not representative of all the students. You only need to come up with one reason. Just make sure you explain it and then say that it's not representative of all students. The next part B was, in this setting, how could bias have been introduced based on the way the question was worded? Well, we actually have 2 problems with this. First off, we say many students believe. As soon as I've done that, I'm basically telling you that if you don't believe the way they do, you're different. I've applied peer pressure, so that's a response bias. All right? And that's what I said here. Many students believe that the food served in the dining hall needs improvement, which can cause many students to go along with the norm and say yes rather than giving their own opinion. So we're going to overrepresent the group that says that it needs improvement and underrepresent those that say that it's that believe that it doesn't. All right. The next thing they said they added a new variable. The question is, does the food need improvement? But they said, hey, you know what? If we improve it, it's going to increase the cost of the meal plan. Well, that's confounding results. In other words, we're adding an extra factor into, and bias is introduced by including the phrase, even though that would increase the cost of the meal plan, because the cost consideration is included, and students may think that the food is awful, but are unwilling or unable to pay for their meals. Remember, they're college students, and some of them are pretty broke, And it's like, you know what? I don't like the food, but it's the only food I have. So yeah, I think it needs to be improved, but if it's going to cost me more money, no, I'm going to say no. So once again, I'm going to overrepresent opinions who say, in this case, I'll say I overrepresent those who say not to improve the food, even though I believe, even though they may believe that it needs to be improved. Part C, how could the question have been worded differently to avoid that bias? And actually, it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. We could just say, do you think that the quality of food served here needs improvement? Very blunt, very straightforward. I didn't say that there was no pressure given in one way, form, or fashion. Okay, so that's it on the bias scenarios.